In 1885, the leaders of Europe sat around a table in Berlin and divided a continent they had never fully seen. In one hand they carried treaties, in the other they carried Bibles. They called it a civilizing mission. They called it salvation. But for millions of Africans, it began not with a sermon, but with a shadow. The shadow of the ship, the shadow of the flag, and close behind it always the shadow of the cross. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to travel across the continent, from the Royal Court of Congo to the missions of East Africa, from the rubber forests of the Congo to the segregated pews of South Africa, to trace how a faith arrived wrapped in violence, and how the people who received it were never simply asked if they wanted it. This is the story of the cross and the crown, and the people caught between them. Before a single European missionary set foot on African soil, the continent was not spiritually empty. It was spiritually vast. In West Africa, the Yoruba honored a pantheon of orishas, each governing a force of nature and human life: Ogun of iron and war, Yemoja of rivers and motherhood, Sango of thunder and justice. In the Congo Basin, communities held deep cosmologies linking the living, the dead, and the unborn in a single unbroken circle, expressed through Nkisi power objects and ancestral veneration. Across the Sahel, Islam had already taken root centuries earlier, arriving through trade routes and blending with local tradition to produce distinctly West African forms of Muslim practice. And in Ethiopia, Christianity itself was already ancient, practiced independently since the 4th century, when the Kingdom of Aksum adopted it as a state religion, centuries before any European ship reached the African coast. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church developed its own liturgy, its own saints, its own theology, entirely outside European influence. Africa was not waiting to be given religion. It already had it, layered, diverse, and deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. How land was allocated, how disputes were settled, how illness was understood, how the dead were honored. What arrived from Europe beginning in the 1400s was not the introduction of faith to a blank continent. It was the imposition of one faith over many, and, in time, the branding of everything else as superstition. The first true encounter came in 1491, when Portuguese ships reached the Kingdom of Congo, one of Central Africa's most powerful states. Portuguese priests baptized the reigning king, Nzinga Nkuwu, and his son, who took the name Afonso I, became one of history's most fascinating case studies in African Christianity. Afonso didn't have Christianity forced onto him at gunpoint. He embraced it with real conviction, studied Latin and theology, and tried to build a genuinely Congolese Catholic kingdom, with Congolese priests, Congolese churches, and a Congolese royal court that saw itself as part of Christian Europe's diplomatic world. He even sent his own son Enrique to Rome, where Enrique was consecrated as one of the first black Catholic bishops in history, around 1518. But it was already a bargain struck under pressure. Portugal wanted two things from Congo: souls and slaves. And very quickly those two goals collided. Afonso himself wrote in anguish to the King of Portugal, describing how Portuguese traders were seizing his own subjects, even nobles, even relatives, and shipping them into slavery faster than the church could baptize them. Within a few generations, the kingdom that had embraced Christianity as an equal partner was being hollowed out by the transatlantic slave trade, a trade that Portuguese Christians ran, financed, and in many cases blessed. Christianity's very first sustained encounter with sub-Saharan Africa was already tangled with human trafficking. The cross and the slave ship arrived on the same tide, and would remain entangled for the next 300 years. By the 1800s, a new ideology had crystallized in Europe, a triad repeated in missionary pamphlets and parliamentary speeches alike: commerce, Christianity, civilization. The explorer and missionary David Livingstone helped popularize this idea, that trade routes, churches, and European rule would together redeem Africa from what he and his contemporaries called its darkness. It sounded noble to European audiences. In practice, it became the moral cover story for conquest. When European powers gathered in Berlin in 1884 to carve up the African continent, without a single African representative in the room, missionary expansion and colonial expansion moved forward hand in hand. Missionary societies often received funding, land grants, and military protection directly from colonial governments. In many territories, a mission station and a colonial administrative post were built side by side, sometimes sharing the very same compound. Missionaries were not a monolith. Many genuinely believed they were saving souls, building schools, fighting disease, translating scripture into local languages, work that, in isolation, brought real benefit to many communities. Some spoke out forcefully against colonial abuses, and a few paid for it with their careers or their lives. But the system they operated inside made a certain kind of complicity almost structurally unavoidable. Their access to African communities depended on colonial military and political power, and colonial power, in turn, pointed to the presence of missions as proof that Europe was civilizing, not simply extracting. There's a saying, often attributed to independence-era African leaders, that captures how many came to see this era. Christianity's expansion into East Africa reveals a different, often overlooked layer of the story, the rivalry between the missionaries themselves. In the Kingdom of Buganda, in what is now Uganda, both Catholic missionaries from France and Protestant missionaries from Britain arrived within years of each other in the 1870s, each vying for the favor of the royal court, and each backed, informally or formally, by rival European powers eager to claim the kingdom's strategic position near the source of the Nile. The rivalry turned deadly. Between 1885 and 1887, dozens of young Christian converts in the Buganda royal court, pages and courtiers who had embraced the new faith, were executed by King Mwanga II, partly out of fear that their growing allegiance to foreign religions and foreign missionaries threatened his authority over his own kingdom. Today they are remembered as the Uganda martyrs, canonized by the Catholic Church. It's a story often told simply as a tale of faith and persecution. But it was also something else. A local ruler watching two competing European religious factions embed themselves in his court, each connected to a European power that had ambitions on his territory, and reacting brutally to a genuine and justified fear of losing sovereignty. Within a decade of those executions, Buganda was a British protectorate. The missions that had seemed to Mwanga like a threat to his throne turned out to be exactly that. Not every colonial power pursued the same strategy, but nearly all of them used the church as an instrument of cultural transformation. France's colonial doctrine was built around a policy called assimilation, the idea that Africans could, in theory, become French, legally, culturally, spiritually, by abandoning their own languages, customs, and religions in favor of French ones. Catholic missions became a central tool of this policy. Mission schools across French West Africa taught exclusively in French, punished students for speaking Wolof, Bambara, Fon, or dozens of other African languages, and organized the school day and calendar entirely around the Catholic liturgical year, regardless of what a student's family actually believed. For a small elite of assimilated Africans, this system opened doors: access to colonial administration jobs, French citizenship in rare cases, higher education in Paris. But for the vast majority, it functioned as a slow campaign of erasure, teaching entire generations that their own grandparents' beliefs, languages, and ways of understanding the world were obstacles to be overcome rather than heritage to be kept. The Senegalese scholar and later President Leopold Sédar Senghor, himself educated in Catholic mission schools, would spend much of his later intellectual life building the philosophy of negritude, in part as a response to this very system, a reclaiming of African identity against a colonial education designed to replace it. Conversion was rarely left to persuasion alone, and nowhere is that clearer than inside the mission school and the mission boarding house. Across colonized Africa, colonial administrations, often working directly with mission churches, outlawed traditional religious practices. Ancestral shrines were destroyed or deconsecrated. Traditional healers and diviners were branded as witch doctors and prosecuted under colonial law. Initiation rites, sacred dances, and traditional forms of dress were banned in mission-run schools and in many territories by colonial statute itself. Children taken into mission boarding schools were frequently forbidden from speaking their own languages, punished, sometimes physically, for using the words their grandparents had used for 1,000 years. They were given European baptismal names to replace the names their families had chosen for them. Their hair, their dress, their music, even their sleeping and eating arrangements were restructured around European Christian norms. Girls in mission schools faced a particular kind of transformation: instruction narrowly focused on domestic skills, sewing, cooking, Christian homemaking, designed to produce wives suitable for a new church-sanctioned model of the African family, one built around monogamous, male-headed households that often did not reflect the kinship and family structures many communities had practiced for generations. Existing marriage customs, inheritance systems, and women's traditional roles in trade, land management, or spiritual leadership were frequently dismissed by missionaries as obstacles to proper Christian womanhood. For many African families, the mission school became the only path to literacy, medicine, or economic opportunity under colonial rule, which meant the choice to send a child there or to convert as a parent was rarely a free one. It was often simply the price of survival in a world where the alternative was exclusion, poverty, or outright legal disadvantage. Nowhere is the entanglement of cross and crown more chilling than in the Congo Free State, the personal colony of Belgium's King Leopold II between 1885 and 1908. Leopold framed his brutal rubber extraction regime, one that killed an estimated several million Congolese through forced labor, mutilation, and famine-related disease, explicitly as a Christian civilizing mission, presented to the world as philanthropy. Missionaries were invited in to help administer and legitimize this system. And yet the fullest picture is more complicated than a simple story of church complicity. Some missionaries, most famously the African-American Presbyterian missionary William Shepherd, along with British Baptist missionaries like John and Alice Harris, became crucial whistleblowers. Shepherd's first-hand documentation of mutilations under the rubber regime, and the photographic evidence gathered by missionaries and shared with reformers like E.D. Morel and Roger Casement, helped ignite an international human rights campaign that eventually forced Leopold to relinquish personal control of the colony in 1908. It's a case that resists a single moral. The same missionary infrastructure that had, for years, provided religious cover for an atrocity also produced the witnesses who ultimately exposed it. The cross was not only a tool of domination in the Congo. For a handful of missionaries, it became the platform from which they broke ranks with empire. In South Africa, the entanglement between faith and domination took a different, equally devastating institutional form. The Dutch Reformed Church, the Church of South Africa's Afrikaner settler population, developed over decades a theology that provided religious justification for racial separation, teaching that different races were divinely ordained to develop separately, each according to its own calling. This theology helped underpin the legal architecture of apartheid, the system of racial segregation formally enacted in 1948, which the Church's own doctrine treated less as a political policy than as a moral and even sacred order. At the same time, other Christian denominations in South Africa, including many black-led congregations and figures like Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu generations later, used that same faith as the moral foundation for the anti-apartheid struggle, arguing that the gospel demanded justice and equality rather than separation. The same religion, the same scriptures, produced both the theological scaffolding for apartheid and the moral language used to dismantle it. Christianity in Africa was never a single force pulling in one direction. It was a battlefield of interpretation, fought over by people with radically different stakes in the outcome. This history is not only about the distant colonial past. Its aftershocks reached into some of the 20th century's darkest hours. By the 1990s, Rwanda was one of the most densely Christian nations on earth, the vast majority of its population Catholic or Protestant, a legacy of over a century of Belgian and missionary influence that had also helped entrench and racialize the Hutu-Tutsi distinction that colonial administrators had hardened into rigid, documented ethnic categories. During the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, in which an estimated 800,000 people were killed in roughly 100 days, some churches, the very buildings where communities had gathered for generations of Christian worship, became sites of unimaginable violence, as victims sought sanctuary there and were killed regardless. In the years since, the Catholic Church has formally acknowledged the failures of some of its clergy during the genocide, and several priests and religious figures have faced prosecution for their roles. It is a devastating illustration of a deeper truth this documentary has traced from its very first act. A religion introduced through colonial structures, entangled from the start with power, land, and the classification of human beings into hierarchies, carries those entanglements forward, sometimes for generations in ways no one fully anticipated. But Africa was never simply a passive recipient. Even as Christianity was imposed, Africans reshaped it, reclaimed it, and in some cases turned it into a weapon against the very colonizers who brought it. In 1921 in the Belgian Congo, a man named Simon Kimbangu began preaching a Christianity that was unmistakably African, one that spoke directly to his people's suffering under colonial rule, blending Christian scripture with local prophetic tradition. The colonial government was so threatened by his movement that they imprisoned him for the remaining 30 years of his life. Today, the church he founded has millions of members across Central Africa and is a full member of the World Council of Churches. Across Nigeria, the Aladura churches, a Yoruba word meaning owners of prayer, blended Christian worship with African spiritual practice, prophecy, visions, healing rituals, and a direct, personal relationship with the divine, creating something neither fully European nor fully traditional, but distinctly and confidently African. In southern Africa, Zionist and apostolic churches did the same, incorporating ancestral veneration, healing practices, and communal structures that mission Christianity had once tried to stamp out, folding them instead into a Christianity that finally felt like home. And across the wider global South, Christianity itself would eventually become a language of liberation rather than submission. Independence movements, from Kenya to Angola to South Africa, drew on Christian moral language, the language of justice, of the oppressed being lifted up, of tyrants being cast down, to demand the end of the very colonial systems that had once used that same faith to justify their rule. The faith brought in chains was, in the hands of African believers, transformed into something they could genuinely, fully call their own. Today, Africa is home to some of the fastest growing and most vibrant Christian communities on earth. For hundreds of millions of people, that faith is not a colonial relic. It is a living, deeply personal, freely chosen part of who they are, expressed through churches, theology, and worship styles that Africans themselves have built. But the history of how it arrived cannot be softened. It came, for many communities, at the point of a gun. It came with the burning of shrines and the silencing of languages. It came bundled, inseparably for centuries, with the slave trade, the colonial land grab, the rewriting of family and gender, and, in its darkest chapters, complicity in mass violence. To tell this story honestly means holding several truths at once: that faith and empire arrived together, that missionaries were neither uniformly villains nor uniformly saints, and that the people on the receiving end were never merely victims. They were interpreters, resistors, whistleblowers, reformers, the ones who, in the end, decided what this imposed faith would actually become. The cross came with the crown. But it was Africa that decided what it would mean.